Hello and welcome to Save Your Sanity live stream. I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler and I'm so glad you're joining us. Today I'm with my guest, Dr. Sherry Cormier, and we are going to be talking about overcoming the grief of losing yourself in a relationship and even after you've left the relationship, what it is you're experiencing. So welcome to the show, Sherry.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here too, because people enjoy your insights and wisdom about dealing with grief of all kinds. And I've shared with everybody in the promo for today that Sherry's book is called Sweet Sorrow: Finding Enduring Wholeness After Loss and Grief. Doesn't that sound attractive? You want to find enduring wholeness after loss and grief. So previously, Sherry and I have done a Facebook Live talking about getting over the grief after you've left a toxic relationship. But today we're going to talk about the grief when you feel like, who am I? I've given everything to this relationship and I feel lost. I feel like I've lost myself. And that's something, Sherry, that people say to me frequently. I
Mm-hmm,
don't even know who I am anymore. I've
mm-hmm,
just lost myself.
mm-hmm,
So I thought that we should talk about what creates that,
mm-hmm,
when you get to a place where you are really focused on giving and
mm-hmm,
overgiving and
yeah,
being demanded to overgive.
mm-hmm,
And then maybe in your nature, you like to please people.
mm-hmm.
And then the demand to please a difficult person may be there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this is really an important topic. Now, I am widowed, and I've been widowed. My late husband, Jay, died about almost 14 years ago, and I have
Mhm.
not repartnered. I've had a couple of relationships, but I have not. I live alone, and I am not currently in a relationship. And I find that I think women, I hear this a little bit more from women clients, female clients. I think women are conditioned a little bit more to be overly accommodating in particularly in heterosexual relationships. I think it's a little bit less of an issue in some of the gay couples that I've worked with, but it can be an issue too there. But in for sure, I think with many women in heterosexual relationships, there's this tendency, almost a conditioned response, to be overly accommodating. And when you are consistently and chronically overly accommodating in a romantic relationship, but it's not even confined to a romantic relationship. It could be with a parent, it could be with your own child, either a minor child or an adult child, even.
Yeah.
It could be with a sibling, it could be with your best friend.
Mhm.
You become overly accommodating in many kinds of relationships. It could be with a colleague at work. And I think what happens then is we give ourselves away.
Mhm.
And when we give ourselves away, we lose ourselves. It's a form of a loss. It's a loss that we don't talk about very much. I'm really delighted that you picked this topic tonight because I don't think we really sit back and acknowledge this kind of loss. And yet I think it's pretty common. You said you've heard a lot about it from many of the
Mhm.
people you work
Mhm.
with.
Well, I think too, to add to that, um, I think maybe it may be true what you were saying about women being overly
Mhm,
accommodating because they've been accultured to be.
mhm,
But when you're in a toxic relationship, maybe you were already going in that direction yourself. Maybe
mhm,
that's who you've been taught to be. But
mhm,
then there is the demand to be it, even if that's not who you are. So we
mhm,
get the double whammy, and I find that that happens in all kinds of relationships, whether they're gay or bi or
mhm,
um, heterosexual or whatever they are, whatever constellation of
Mhm.
relationship, and as you said, and also with a parent or with
Yes.
an adult child or a
Yes.
sibling, because people who are toxic are demanding.
Mhm.
And they want you to overgive, and you as a healthier person than they are feels like, "Okay, well, that's what
Mhm.
you do." And the
Mhm.
thing with toxic people, the hijackals that I talk about, is when they say, "I'll meet you in the middle," they think they're standing on the 50-yard line.
Yes.
But
Yes.
they're already in the middle, and you're supposed to
Right.
come to them, and, I on my Facebook page, facebook.com/hijackals, I put a lot of memes that I create for people to share,
Yes.
and one of them there talks about, when a hijackal thinks they're compromising, what they mean is you should be sacrificing,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And so I think that, I think then if you stay in the relationship or you are committed to being in the relationship that can be even more challenging sometimes if the toxic person is a family member,
Oh, yeah.
even than a romantic relationship. But if you are committed to that and then you end up doing a lot of sacrificing over a long period of time, I think you can actually put both your physical and mental health at risk.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I have seen so many people who have been in toxic relationships or were raised by toxic
Mhm.
parents. I used to own a health and yoga retreat where I had my private practice. So I saw that connection even more there. Um, because what happens is it creates inflammation in the body.
It does.
And so
Yes.
we get autoimmune diseases,
Mhm.
ankylosing spondylitis,
Mhm.
lupus, fibromyalgia,
Hashimoto's. Mhm.
Hashimoto's,
Mhm.
Raynaud's, all
Yeah.
kinds of things that will show up, and because of the emotional impact.
Yeah.
And then it's really important to get out of the relationship and
Yeah.
to resurrect yourself and say, I'm more important than this. I
Yes.
care more about myself than this. I'm
Yeah.
not going to be ill every day in order to please somebody else. Because
Mhm.
really, when you're dealing with hijackals, they are just not interested. They're kind of like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland, just off with their heads.
Right. Right.
They don't care.
They're
And
not, yeah, they don't really care about your well-being. They're self-absorbed, and their primary concern is their own well-being and not your well-being,
that's
which
right.
is kind of a definition of a one-sided toxic relationship.
Mhm. And they keep making demands
Yes.
saying, "You should give me more, you
Mhm.
should give me more, you
Yes.
should give me more." I just got off the phone with a client who's still in the relationship, and this is the first time I've spoken to her, and she's been married to this person for 8 years, and at one point in the relationship, when their baby was young, for 2 years, he paid the family expenses and went to work. And now the child is 7 years old, and he wants to be reimbursed for having to pay for the family expenses for those 2 years.
That's
Like, on what planet are you
okay, right.
living?
Has he
Right?
been to outer space and back like Bill Shatner, right?
Well, or maybe just lives in outer space
Maybe he
and
lives
we just
there. Yes, that's a very absurd demand.
Well, it's absolutely crazy making, but my point being, when you've been worn down and told you're not good enough over and over again, she said to me, "Well, now, I'm gonna have to pay him, back for all of the expenses when I stayed home with the baby." And no, you are
No.
not going to do that. You don't have to do that. But, she can't even think straight at this point.
Yeah,
Just can't think straight.
because she's lost herself. I think one of the sort of the hallmark features when or when someone mirrors you back and you find out you've lost yourself in a relationship is you don't think straight. You're not thinking straight. You're having difficulty thinking straight.
Right.
It's like you you're kind of out there in la la land, or your head has gotten unscrewed from your body, and because if someone told her this,
Mhm.
just think about it. She's going to lunch or coffee with another woman who says this to her, like, oh, guess what? My husband wants me to pay him for these 2 years of expenses. I'm sure this person would look at the other woman like, oh, this is absurd. But because it has to do with her and her relationship, and over these 8 years, she's been lit, and it's insidious. I don't think
Mhm.
you lose yourself all at once, but I think little by little by little, and then all of a sudden, you don't know who you are anymore.
Yeah, exactly, and we've got some people who have joined us.
Okay,
Someone
good.
asked me if I could call him. No. Uh, um, but Lily said, "I had a judge that laughed at my ex for saying that," right? And that's so true. It's a laughable thing, but
Yes.
it's the kind of thing that hijackals do, and it's the
Mhm.
kind of thing that when you're worn down and torn down and put down over time, you lose the ability and you lose the sight of what is quote unquote healthy. And,
Yes.
I'm not surprised with her, but she said, "I knew I needed to talk to you because you would bring me back to reality." And I
Right.
said, "Yes, but not only do we please people and lose ourselves, but when you're in a toxic relationship, the other person wants to define you. They want to gaslight you. They want to tell
Mhm.
you what you think and feel and need
Mhm.
and want and remember.
Mhm.
And so you start to lose yourself there because
Yes.
you're second guessing yourself and
Mhm.
questioning your sanity."
Mhm. Yes. And you're giving yourself away to, again, accommodate their view of you, their definition of you, rather than your view of yourself, your definition. So you start losing touch with what your needs are, what your
Mhm.
desires are, what your wants are, what your preferences are. Even, you go out to dinner. What do you want? And you draw a blank,
Yeah.
um, because you start. That's part of the scenario is all the clarity that you used to have about yourself as an individual person just goes to mush, I think. And then after a while, you don't know, it's like you don't know anything about yourself. What's your
Yeah.
favorite color? I don't know. I mean, it used to be blue, you say, but what is it now? Well, he likes yellow on me. So,
Mhm.
and
Exactly.
we, little by little, we start giving ourselves away. Could be with a romantic person, but plenty of us who are moms have given ourselves away to our children, even adult children, and to older parents, and to siblings, and even to close friends. So, it's a kind of a hallmark of a really kind of challenging relationship where we're not honored. We are not legitimate. We are not, sort of held in the same regard and esteem as the other person.
Right.
And that's not love. I mean, that's not a loving relationship, where we're not held with the same regard.
No, that's true, and we start to, feel that less than, right?
Yes.
We start to take that on as, "I must be doing something wrong.
Right.
I shouldn't have an opinion. I shouldn't stand up for myself because it
Mm-hmm.
only causes a problem."
Mm-hmm.
And then you get smaller and smaller, and
Yes.
you start to become, restricting yourself. You start contracting and
Yes.
restricting yourself, and you do that in your mind too, in the space
Yeah.
that you take up. And that's a way that you lose yourself. And
Yeah.
of course, all hijackals love, 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 love to gaslight you. They
Yes.
want to define your reality for you. And if anybody ever says this to you, or you find yourself saying this, I want you to know, big, big, big red flag. I know you better than you know yourself.
Yes. Huge red flag.
Mm,
Huge red flag. And that does need to be an immediate sign that you have lost yourself and the person is encouraging you to lose yourself. I
right.
mean, there's almost an insistence on let me define you to meet my needs, which is by definition, you're shrinking. You know, what you talked about earlier, you're contracting, you're shrinking. And I've worked with plenty of people, and I know you have too, Dr. Shaler, that come in and say, I feel invisible
Right.
when I'm with this person.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, I've become invisible to myself. And that's a sure sign that you have almost completely lost touch in that particular relationship with who you are.
Yeah, a client said those very words to me yesterday. I
Mhm.
just feel invisible, and that's
Yes.
exactly how they want you to feel. And so Lily added, I was treated like the help,
Help. Mhm.
right? I mean, that's a horrible
Mhm.
way to define
Mhm.
yourself um, in context of any
Mhm.
relationship, but especially one that is supposed to be loving.
Yes. And I've known so many other, I've known many, many women who feel that way, that they've been treated like the help. And I think one of the signs that, you know, you're in pain and that you are grieving the loss of yourself is that you're unhappy, you're crying, you feel sad, you feel
Mhm.
sorrowful. The relationship doesn't bring you joy anymore. It's not a source of pleasure to you anymore. It's just painful, painful, painful.
Mhm. And and then you're told so frequently that you're useless or not good
Yes,
enough or not valuable, and you're
yes.
definitely seeing the demonstration in the behavior that you're not being valued.
Mhm,
And so that wears you down again,
mhm,
and you start to take that on. Some people take
mhm.
that on as their self-concept. "Well,
Yes.
that person must be right, they say it all the time."
Mhm,
No, I mean, that's the way you perpetuate a lie, is by
mhm.
saying it over and over and over.
Yes.
And that's basically what toxic people do to have power
Mhm,
over you. They tell a lie, and then they repeat it over and over
mhm.
again. And then you start thinking, "Well, maybe I should believe that." Well, no,
Yes.
because this is a way that you totally lose yourself. And,
Mhm,
in your book, and everybody, if you just joined us, I'm talking with Dr. Sherry Cormier, the author of the book Sweet Sorrow, Finding Enduring Wholeness After Loss and Grief. And certainly we have that going on. But in the book, you talk about voluntary losses versus involuntary losses, such as being widowed or
mhm,
something. So when
mhm,
we're thinking of leaving these people, we're actually preparing, which is why I have my membership community called Emerging Empowered Community,
mhm,
because we're actually preparing for the fact that we are going to create, or maybe are just even at the stage of asking, should I be creating a voluntary loss? And we
mhm,
need to be ready to do that, and for people who are interested in knowing about the community, you can go to joinintoday.com. I'll put it up for you, and have a look to see if that would be something you'd like to join into, the emerging empowered community at joinintoday.com.
That's a great idea.
Mm,
Yes,
yeah.
because when you do choose to leave some relationship, whether it's a romantic one or you extricate yourself from a toxic family member or work colleague or friend, you know, it's the loss of the relationship too.
Mhm.
And so then the opportunity to join a community is helpful because you
Right.
have somewhere to put that energy and to take that grief because you're choosing to do it, but you're losing voluntarily that
Mhm.
relationship that has probably been very, very important to you
Well,
for
it
a
certainly
while.
was in the beginning, and you keep holding on to the straws of hope
Mhm.
that,
Yes.
"Oh, it will be again, it will be
Yes.
again," and that's a lot of the process of deciding to leave. There's so many factors, and every individual case is different to some
Yes.
degree, but when you are even just looking at, "How do I make this decision?" it's important to realize that you have to get yourself back. Like I tell people
Mhm.
all the time, um, unless there's physical or sexual abuse, don't leave. Let's figure it out. You don't want
Mhm.
to leave in a mess. You don't wanna leave
Mhm.
depleted. You don't wanna
Right.
leave so worn down that you can't even think.
Yes.
You want to have tried strategies. You want to have re-empowered yourself. You
Mhm.
want to have reclaimed your voice and
Mhm.
reclaimed your life
Yes.
and tried a lot of things so that when you do leave, you're in an empowered state.
Yes. You're leaving from a position of strength rather than weakness.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So when you're thinking of creating a voluntary loss, we know that you're going to have some anticipatory grief, right?
Mhm. Yes, you do. Whether you want to or not,
Yeah.
you will have it.
Mhm.
And I think that actually that's helpful because anticipatory grief, I think, actually helps us cope with loss before the actual event sort of comes down the pike. And then
Mhm.
when the actual breakup occurs, we may actually be in better shape than we think, to some degree. You know,
Well, that's our hope, that
yeah.
people will be in better shape, because if you leave when the moment is just too horrible,
Hmm.
people will say to me, they kind of know better now, but they would say to me, "Well, I don't care if I just get out with the clothes on my back and the children, I'm gonna leave."
Yeah.
Well, why would you do that? You're entitled
Right.
to so much more.
Yes, and especially, I think one of the things that we don't talk enough about among women, for women, with women, is we talk a lot about self care. We don't talk enough about financial self care.
Right.
So you don't want to just leave with your children and the clothes on your back because that is not looking out for yourself in terms of self care with a financial piece of it, which is very important for us as women.
Mhm. And it's important for men too. I had an
Mhm.
extremely wealthy client who said, "I'll just give her anything you want. I just want her out of here." I said, "No, you won't."
Yes, and I've heard that as well from men. It's important for men too. Yeah,
Yeah. No, 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 no. Let's
right.
get through the emotional piece before you start
Mhm.
making any financial and
Right.
logistical decisions, right?
Yes,
Really important.
people when they want to, I think what happens is when you lose yourself, whether you're a man or woman, or even a non-binary or any kind of gender you identify with, if you want to leave a relationship badly enough, often we leave sort of emotionally impulsively,
Mhm.
and then we're willing to give up anything, and that's too much. That's too
Exactly.
much.
Yeah.
So being leaving from a place of empowerment and strength, then rather than this sort of impulsive, quick, just get out of here and give away anything,
Yeah.
then we can slow down and really think about, what do I want to take with me?
Mhm. And
And
in
what
the
do I
meantime,
deserve? What do I deserve?
yes, and in the meantime, while you're slowing down, you're affirming to yourself, "All right, I know that my day is going to come. I'm going to
Mhm.
make this decision. I am working on it." So you feel more powerful and
Yes.
you're getting skills and strategies, and then you are not saying, "Well, I don't know if I'm gonna leave," or "I don't know if I should leave." You are beginning to say, "No, I know, and
Hmm.
I'm now about to set a date," and you
Yeah.
don't talk about any of those things with the person. But,
No.
Lisa just said this, she said, "I find that toxic people do not like strength and confidence," and, that's just so true.
Hmm.
They don't. They don't want you to be strong, they don't
Hmm.
want you to be confident, they want you to be malleable and
Hmm.
people-pleasing on
Yes.
steroids,
Yes.
preferably.
And I think it's why a toxic person can and does wear the partner down or the other person down is if you can, if they can wear you down, then that makes you more malleable. It makes you less confident. It makes you weak rather than strong. Because if you have strength and confidence and you are grounded in yourself and not losing yourself, then they will not be able to manipulate you.
Right, right. And
And
that's
that, yeah.
and that's so valuable to remember
Hmm.
that their task is, how do I get as much as I can by giving as little as possible?
Yes.
And so that manipulation is very, very clear. And when you recognize that, you can say, no,
Hmm.
no, it's
Yes.
not going to happen.
And I
Mm-mm.
think that's part of the grief, though. I think part of the grief is when you have allowed yourself to be manipulated, or you've allowed yourself to be sort of worn down and diminished. Part of the grief is that you're
Yeah.
not you anymore.
No, you
You
gave
know,
up on yourself.
you gave up on yourself. You allowed yourself to be put in a position that doesn't feel good.
And
And I
you did
think,
it from a good place too, though, Sherry. I think you'd agree. You did it from a good place of saying, "No, I'm gonna make the relationship work. I want this
right,
to work.
exactly.
I'm invested in the
Yes.
relationship."
Hmm. You did it right. You did it from a place of trying
Mhm.
and not wanting to give up too soon. But I think that's part of what we end up grieving. I think there's a sort of grief in realizing we've been sucker punched and we've been
Yeah.
manipulated and we've been, uh, hung out to dry, and we've been uh, made to feel like we're not deserving, and we've been worn down in terms of our strength, and we feel disempowered. I think
Mhm.
all of that we need to grieve, and we do, we feel sorrowful.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. That sort of light bulb moment when you turn a corner and say,
Hmm.
"Let me step away from this and say,
Hmm.
what's really going on?" Because your nose is in it all the time, and they're
Yes.
pushing your nose in it.
Yes.
And so you don't have that perspective to say, I don't even feel like myself anymore. What's going on? I'm stressed all the
Yes.
time. I'm looking over my shoulder. I've become
Hmm.
hyper vigilant. I'm always
Walking on
thinking about,
eggshells.
yes, I always think about their needs, their
Hmm.
wants. I was saying to a client earlier today, she said, "Well, when he walks in the room, I get anxious." I said, "Oh no, you were anxious knowing he was going to walk into the room." And she went, "Oh, that's true." Right.
Hmm.
And, Lisa again contributed, and everybody feel free to ask questions or contribute in
Hmm.
the chat. Um, that she had to leave when she was in danger. There wasn't any time to
Hmm.
leave or think about it.
Hmm.
And when you are in danger, absolutely you have to act.
Yes.
What we're talking about is for those people who are, they may be in emotional danger because they're slowly ebbing
Hmm.
away who they are. But if you are in any physical or sexual danger or,
Hmm.
financial danger that is
Absolutely.
threatening, of course you
Hmm.
have to leave. You don't have any choice, and
Hmm.
you may not have the option to leave empowered. But for those of you who do, I really encourage you to do it. And in your book, in Sweet Sorrow, you talked about you have to face the loss.
Hmm.
And are you going to be resisting, or are you going to be yielding? And I added
Hmm.
one, are you going to be accepting?
Yes. And acceptance is really sort of the when you get peace. When
Mhm.
you can accept, you can get peace. But we often fight what our reality is, like because we don't want to leave, or we don't want to be alone, or, I certainly didn't want to lose my beloved husband to stage 4 cancer. And so we
Mhm.
fight, right? And yet, when we get to that place of acceptance, that's when we can start to feel peace. And it's no coincidence that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's written about the stages of grief. And although they're sort of, I'm going to use stages in parentheses because they're not really stages.
Linear. Yeah.
Right. They're not linear. But, you know, she does talk about sort of the end point of the grieving process is acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Is just being able to accept that this is what has happened, not to agree with it, not to love it, but just to, instead of resisting, which
Mm-hmm.
really creates more suffering, I think.
Oh, I think it does too, because
Mhm.
that's when you really start to second guess yourself. You
Yes.
know, well, I should have done it. I should have seen it. I should never let this
Yeah.
happen to the children. Should never have let this happen to myself. And you're just,
Mhm.
beating yourself up all the
Yes.
time.
Hammering yourself like with a hammer on your head.
And the most important thing is to come to the place of saying, okay, that happened. What did
Yes.
I learn from it? And from
Yes.
that learning, what will I do going forward? And so if I could just accept that, all right, that was a stage of my life. That
Yeah.
was something that, horrendous as it may have been, I survived. There's learning there for me. And I am glad that I am out of it.
Mhm.
I have moved on behalf of myself by getting out of this.
Yes.
And now I am going to say, all right, good. I now have an opportunity to be a person in a relationship with the world that has the 3 must-haves of a healthy adult relationship that I talk about all the time. If relationships don't have these 3 things, you don't have anything to build on, and they're equality and equity, reciprocity, and mutuality. And you will never have those things with a toxic person. You will never
Yes.
have them with a hijackal, a person with narcissistic
Mhm.
tendencies or antisocial tendencies.
Mhm.
You will never have them.
Yes, and I think one thing that's important to say here is that toxicity doesn't just belong to men. I mean,
Oh,
like
no.
you were saying before, I've seen men and worked with men that are in relationships with a toxic female partner.
Oh, absolutely. There are
So it's
equal
not,
numbers.
yes, it's not this one sided thing. I think that it may present differently, but it doesn't, yeah, those 3 things are really important. And we find in some very lopsided relationships that sometimes men are very good at providing those 3 things, and the female partners are not. Or if it's a gay relationship, the other partner is not. So we don't want, I want to make sure that we're not just assuming that it's always a
Yeah.
man who's the narcissist.
And that's really good that you brought that up because it's absolutely true.
Hmm.
There are equal numbers of male and female hijackals. They do
Yes.
present differently,
Yes.
but they're there. They're as
Yes.
demanding.
Yes.
They're out to get everything that they can while giving as little as possible, and we know them. They're stereotypical. They're in movies,
Yes.
It's all the time. People
TV shows.
in my community right now are all saying, "Did anybody watch Maid?" You know, because that's what it's all about, and it's becoming more in the public, in the art forms being
Yes.
represented, and that's good. It's
Yes.
really good. There's a TV show called Dirty John. That's triggering to my people, but it's there, and it allows people to see it. Now, Alicia just said, "I think I've." I think I've always feared the anticipation of grief before the actual grieving. I'm learning how to grieve." Well, that's
Mhm.
good. Sherry, what would you say to people who need to learn how to grieve? What would you tell them?
Well, I would say, I'm trying to read our next comment too. I've had so much compiling grief, I didn't think I could hold another straw, which explains the path I took being much smaller. Yeah. I think, in the United States, we are fairly grief avoidant, almost grief phobic. And
Mm,
that's why it's so wonderful that you have me on and we get to talk about it and bring it out of the closet, get it out in the
mm,
light, bring it out in the open. So just acknowledging is the first step. I think acknowledging that you feel that you are grieving, that you feel sad, that you feel sorrowful, that you're anticipating a loss
Mhm.
and feeling your feelings. Like it's so easy to shove feelings of grief under the rug, so to speak. And not that we need to, not that we need to make grief our whole story and allow it to just completely take over and inhabit our life, but that we give it space in our life. We give it room to emerge and to feel what it feels like to be grieving. And we honor it and acknowledge it.
Yes, I think that's so wise. I mean, it's a natural part of life. You
Yes.
know, we if anybody's ever had a garden, things start, they grow, they bloom, and then they die off.
And
I
yes, and it's a natural part of nature. We're in mid-October now, and depending on what part of the country you live in colder climates, you're seeing a lot of leaves falling off the trees. And at some point, you may live in a climate where the trees are bare. And yet, what do we know happens in April? The trees bud again, and then we
Mhm,
get green leaves. But fall is a season for sort of shedding leaves and letting go. In fact, in Chinese medicine, fall is the season of lungs, which is the organ of grief. And so there's a lot of letting go in the fall that comes with this season. And in letting go, we feel grief. If we're letting go of a relationship, or we've let go of a part of ourself, or you and I were talking before we went on air about decluttering, we're letting go of books and possessions, and maybe even some characteristic about ourself that no longer serves us, or we're letting go of a friendship that doesn't work anymore.
mhm.
We're changing jobs. All of these things we can let go of, and there's grief to acknowledge in anything we let go of.
Yes. There absolutely is, and it nobody wants to experience sadness or experience loss, say,
Mhm.
"Come on, bring it on." That's kind of
Mhm.
sadistic, but the fact is that it is a natural ebb and flow
Mhm.
of life, and just like, growing up, you can
Mhm.
learn to go through things and
Yes.
go through things in a more, um understanding of yourself way
Mhm.
than resisting it. Like, when you use the
Yes.
facing it or resisting it, well, why resist it? We
Mhm.
want to get through it.
Mhm.
That's like saying, "There's something behind the door that I really, really, really want, but I don't wanna open the door."
Yeah, because it feels scary.
Yeah.
Grief is a great teacher. I mean, there's many things we can learn from the experience of grief.
Yeah, so many things, and Alicia added, "I did learn some, which is super helpful now that I'm willing to feel it myself
Mhm.
instead of just observe it and co-piling with others." She mentioned that she had gone to hospice. Yeah, you're so welcome, Alicia. I'm glad that you're here and that you found a really healthy way to look at these things
Yeah.
for yourself. And you talk in the book about grief being cyclical, not linear. I think
Mhm.
that's such an important concept.
Yes, because we've we've unfortunately we have all sort of learned, but we need to unlearn that we believed that grief occurred in these linear stages, but it just does not work that way. It's not like a stair step model of grief where we deny it and then we bargain with it and then we go through anger and then we get to a place of acceptance, like a stair going up a set of stairs.
Mhm,
It's more like, I liken it more like to the cycles of nature, the cycles of the ocean.
mhm,
Like the ebb and flow of the tides or the waves. The
mhm,
waves come in, the waves go out. Sometimes, the waves are stronger than others. And so the cadence of grief, sometimes grief can be like a very shallow wave, and sometimes it can be like a tsunami wave.
yeah. Mhm. I think that, Alicia's added to that. She said, "My grief wasn't acknowledged or guided in childhood, so it actually created a life of heartbreak." That's very insightful, Alicia. That
Yes.
if we haven't if we haven't been helped through it to have it understood, sometimes parents don't even know what to do when a pet dies. So,
No.
that they're not teaching you the great lessons that you could
Mm.
be learning by, "Yeah, we're sad. Yes, this is the
Yes.
way life works, and it is sad." We
Mhm.
shouldn't be brushing it under the carpet and saying, "Get over it, put on your big girl panties and go
Yes.
play," you know? Um,
Yes. And so often I've talked with people who've been a child and lost a family member. They lost a sibling. They lost a parent. And basically, as a child, it is never spoken about again
right.
in the family. The heartbreak of that to me is huge. And then there's almost a trauma, I think, the child carries from that into adulthood. The trauma of the lost family member that's never acknowledged. The child is never allowed to grieve that lost family member, and it becomes traumatic. And then they have to carry that into adulthood. And then they do go into some kind of therapy at that point to learn to work with the loss that might have occurred 20 years ago.
Well, there's that big section that you're pointing out, and there's another piece to it, which is the child may assume that nobody will care if they die either.
That too. And or that it was somehow their fault. They
Well,
were to blame that the person died, or
yeah,
even in the case of a divorce, which is another kind of loss, that a young
yeah.
child may feel that the breakup was their fault.
Well, especially if they're under the age of 6 because of
Yes,
the
six
way
and under.
the brain works and the
That's
brain
the way.
growth occurs.
Yes,
Um, so Sky said, "Grief is painful yet cleansing."
yes.
I think that that's something we'd agree with. And
Mhm.
then said, um, "No one
My
talks about it."
No
My
one
family
talks
of
about.
origin. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and
Mhm.
just like, no, our pets disappeared. I don't know what
Mhm.
happened to them, they didn't die. The bird
Mhm.
flew away, it didn't
Mhm.
die. Um, and it's very important to notice what our families would talk about and would acknowledge,
Yes.
because then we see that as, "Oh, that's all a healthy part of life." But
Yes.
if we're not supposed to have loss, if we don't know how to deal with it, it's the same thing as people's awkward discomfort at thinking about going to a funeral.
Mhm.
Many people, the research shows, and I know you know this, don't go because they say, "I wouldn't know what to say."
Many people don't go to a funeral or a viewing or a service for that very reason. For that very reason. And it's the same reason that many people don't acknowledge the loss. They don't pick up the phone and call the person or write a note because they don't know what to say. I've actually had people who are grieving tell me that they'll be in a grocery store and they will see someone they know who sees them and runs the other direction
Right.
because we are not equipped. We think we're not equipped. And really it's just a matter of saying what's in your heart. I'm so sorry to hear this happen to you.
Right.
This must be really hard, and I'm really sorry, and I want to stay in touch with you, and I'd love to help however I
Mhm.
can. Something
Mhm.
like that, rather than I think so often we feel responsible for fixing someone's grief,
And I
and
think
we
that's what
can't.
happens, Sherry, when people leave a toxic relationship. They didn't understand the toxic relationship.
Mhm,
If you've never had one, it's very hard to understand what it
mhm.
feels like to be in one, and so you don't get any compassion when you're in it because people are
Yes,
saying, "Well, straighten up."
right,
And
right.
then when you leave, they don't know what to say to you, so they try to fix it, like, "Well, you should have left earlier. You
Yes,
wouldn't be in this situation if you hadn't done
yes,
thus and so." It's very difficult, and just to honor the fact that, people are watching and listening. Catherine said, yes, for me, I think I've avoided grief for so long that now that it's here, I'm really trying to accept it as part of me. Good for you. That's a
Yes.
really important thing to be able to take on and take in and say,
Yes.
this is the process I need to engage in right now. And it's healthy.
It is healthy. And I love her comment. I love Catherine's comment too, because, so many people think that if you have a loss, you will get over it and you will move on. And you really don't. And that's really not the task of grief counseling.
Yeah.
The idea of healing from grief is not that you get over it and move on. It's that you learn how to integrate the loss and the feelings of grief into your life, and that you learn how to move forward. That's very different than like getting over it and moving on. Very
Yes.
different.
It's sort of like all of a sudden there was a new room added to your house,
Yes,
right?
yes. But
I
it
just
doesn't
wanna
do away with the rest of the house.
No, no, it's just like, "Oh, now there's another dimension that I have
Yes.
to take in and
Another
process."
dimension. I love that, Roberta.
And I want to let everyone know that Jonah's been writing here, and she's going through something, so let's acknowledge that. She's saying that he just left her after
Oh,
23 years,
years.
and I'm so sorry that you have to go through that, just as we were saying. However, a person who would leave you in that way, you know, maybe this is going to be difficult, and definitely if you're trauma bonded, it will be difficult and you will
Mhm,
struggle, Joan, but, you know, this is a process, and as, Dr. Cormier is saying, we're gonna be with it for a long time, it's gonna be
mhm,
part of us, but
mhm,
it will be a diminishing part of us,
mhm,
right now, I'm sure Joan is, like, front and center, all you can think
mhm,
about and feel about, but
mhm,
as you get some help and as you talk about it, maybe come over and be part of my community at
mhm,
joinintoday.com and have lots of wonderful people to talk to about it, so that you don't feel alone in the process, because it is a big hit. I know it's a big hit
yes,
no
and
matter.
23 years is a long time.
Yeah,
It's a
so
long time to have been really attached to somebody, and then
mhm,
all of a sudden to not have that relationship in place anymore. It,
yes.
yeah, it would be very challenging. I have a great quote I would love to take a minute and just read to the group,
Good.
because I think it pertains to Joan, but Catherine, so many people that have given us such wonderful comments. This quote it was written by a writer named Victoria Erickson, and it's called The Mountain. One day the mountain that is in front of you will be so far behind you it will barely be visible in the distance. But the person you become in learning to get over it, that will stay with you forever. And that, my friends, is the point of the mountain.
Yes, that's
It-
beautifully said.
yes, it just speaks, I think, to the growth part, that as hard as some of these things are, having someone leave us after 23 years, having a family of origin that doesn't allow you to talk about a loss, as hard as these things are, that ultimately there is a kind of strength that we will notice in ourselves as we move through healing of grief, that we will find this sort of strength within ourselves, and there's a kind of growth that can occur from healing with grief.
Mhm.
Doesn't always occur for everyone, but it certainly occurs for many people.
Right, and, Kim added that grief is important and healing, and we
Mhm,
want to really emphasize that for sure.
mhm,
Alicia then said that she was surprised that anger was such a big component,
mhm,
and it is, and we want it. Anger doesn't have to be reactive. We don't have to go and hit the wall, or sometimes that's helpful.
Yeah.
But
A
but
scream.
but to know that it's appropriate to feel angry, that anger just says, "That's not okay with me.
Right.
Whatever just happened or whatever was just said is not okay with me."
Yeah.
And to know that, so that you're aware of that. So I'm glad that you did that. And Catherine added, yes, helping to heal my separations. Grief is an
Mhm.
emotion that needs my attention. Yeah, embrace it. It embrace it
Yes.
as, yeah, because it's an important part of all of us, and it shows our humanity.
Yes.
Yeah. Lily said
Yes, it
that,
really does.
yeah. I forced my family to have a graveside service for my recently deceased father. After 4 months, more grief is
Mhm.
rising to the surface.
Mhm.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
not linear, it's cyclical, and there we
Mhm.
have it. And
Yes.
Ernesto giving us the male perspective. Being a male, there is an added layer because you're not supposed to be weighed down by petty
Mhm.
things or anything for that matter. Real men do
Do
not
not cry.
cry. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I absolutely refute that statement, as I'm sure you do, Ernesto,
Yes.
the way you put it, but real men do cry.
Yes. And I think that I know exactly what Ernesto is saying, though, that I think so many men feel the weight of not being culturally allowed, or having been culturally conditioned not to cry, and not allowed to be vulnerable.
Mhm. I
And
think
I
that's
think, yeah, and I think allowing oneself as a man to be vulnerable
mhm.
is an important part of grieving.
I think so too. And I think that, when I was talking about the three must haves of a healthy adult relationship, the first one is equality and equity.
Mm.
One of the places that I see that lack of equality and equity between the ways that men and women are acculturated
Mhm.
is that, if a family has just lost their home and they're
Yes.
watching the building burn down, the man is the one with his arms around the family.
Yeah. Who has their arms around him?
Exactly, and I think we do have to balance that there are times when women need to embrace men, not because they're going to them for strength, they're going there to be their strength,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
we have to have that equality and equity being
Absolutely.
experienced more. You know, um, we've got lots of comments coming. Alicia said, "I've said before that my partner relationship ending was just
Mhm.
as formidable as a physical death.
Mhm.
It's that big."
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yes.
good for you for acknowledging it.
Yeah, because
Good
it
for
is a
you.
kind of death. I think relationship endings, I think there are many kinds of deaths. A relationship ending is one of them. I think losing a house to a wildfire or a hurricane can be a kind of death, because
Mhm,
that's like losing your nest, your home. It impacts your root chakra. And if you think of your chakra system, your security, your safety, I think losing a job, these are all kinds of deaths. Death isn't just about the physical body dying. I think there's many
no.
kinds of deaths. I think
Mhm,
losing your
mhm.
health and losing mobility, these can be certain kinds of deaths.
Well, I
And
remember a counselor friend of mine probably 30 years ago, and he came over and he said, "I need to talk about my loss." And I said, "Oh, what did you
Mhm,
lose?" And, "Is your family okay? Is everything
mhm,
okay?" And what had happened was he was holding onto a table, and the table flipped, and he caught his fingers underneath it, and he lost 2 of the tips of his fingers.
mhm.
And he said, "It seems really strange, but I'm grieving the loss of the 2 top joints of 2 fingers."
Yes,
And I said, No,
it's not
let's not
strange.
overlook that. That's not
No, yeah,
strange, right?"
it's not strange.
We really need to be able to acknowledge it, and I think Catherine was referring to the mountain that you read
Mhm,
there. Um, and, thank you, Tanya. I'm glad that it's helped you understand the patterns. Um, and Joan adds something, "I have delusional fantasies that he will realize, that he will have a wake-up call." Um, I really invite you, Joan, to ask yourself, Was this the person for me? Because you mentioned before that you were trauma bonded. We're not trauma bonded to healthy people.
Mhm.
So maybe if you could just flip that idea that he will have a wake-up call, that you would have a wake-up call
Yeah,
to the fact that this man wasn't a good person for you. If
I
you were trauma bonded, it tells us that.
mhm. And I think in a way, Joan's comment reflects how she's lost a little bit of herself,
Mhm.
that she's concerned about him having the wake up call. I love what you just said to her. Do the flip and think about Joan, you having the wake up call. I love
Mhm.
that because when Joan has the wake up call, Joan, you're going to recover a big part of yourself.
Yes. Yes, and to be able to say, "Actually," yeah, and I'm putting words in your mouth, Joan, but it may be like, when I really do that flip, I
Mhm.
reject him.
Yes, it
I
might be.
don't I don't want him. I
I don't
don't
want to be with him anymore.
No, I don't like how he was, I don't like how he treated me, I don't like how he spoke to me, I don't like the way he presented himself,
Yeah.
I don't like so much about him, so actually, I am now going to take up my own space, reclaim my own power, and say, "I reject him.
Yeah.
I
And
don't."
that might be a little bit down the line for Joan because I think Joan is
Mhm.
right now hit with just the suddenness of this relationship ending and needing to grieve that. And yet I think you're pointing her toward something she will aim for in the future and where her grief journey will take her.
Yes. Yes, and certainly come on over to joinintoday.com,
Mhm.
Joan, and walk with us because
Yes.
we're there for you. Um, so Kim said, "Yes, it's like a death, but we don't get the same kind of support."
Yes.
I think that's absolutely the case,
Yes.
and Tanya said, "My toxic and narcissistic partner is coming from a tragic story."
Oh.
Well, that's very frequently the case, whether the story is accurate or not. His
Oh.
wife jumped off of 10th floor with the baby.
Mm.
Mm. She has postpartum depression, and he refused to go to therapy or seek professional help. Yeah, well, she may have had more than postpartum
Yes.
depression if you have a toxic and narcissistic
Mm.
partner, because he didn't just become toxic and narcissistic, he was with his wife too.
Mhm. She
So
may have been at her wit's end.
she may well
You
have
know.
been.
Mhm.
And postpartum depression was the way some doctors saw it, and it may
Mhm.
have been accurate, or it may
Mhm.
have been that the doctor just couldn't understand the emotional abuse.
Right.
Very important. Joan,
And didn't validate it or may have invalidated it even.
yes, that's right. And so we have to be very careful. People come and talk to me and they say, "I've been to other therapists." And I say, "I know." And they say they they didn't see it. No, they don't see it because it's not their specialty, it's not their
Yeah.
experience, it's not their expertise. It's like if you go to Dr. Sherry, she's an expert and has focused and researched and learned and written about grief. So she's going to understand. When you come to me and we talk about toxic
Mhm.
relationships and narcissistic relationships, we understand. But if you go to someone who says, well, all you need to do is improve your communication and your conflict management skills when you're dealing with a toxic person, they don't understand,
Yeah. And
right?
there's no validation of the abuse piece, which is, can make someone feel crazy.
Absolutely. And Joan says he is a narcissist. Yes, I lost myself.
Mhm.
Okay, so and Tanya said, "I love him and he does have potential, but why won't he go to therapy? Because he doesn't want to be seen. He doesn't want to be called out. He
Mhm.
doesn't want
Mhm.
he doesn't want any of that.
And he
And he
doesn't want
doesn't
to have to change.
he doesn't want to change. He doesn't want to be made wrong because he
Mhm.
has to believe he's right. There are
Right.
many, many reasons why a toxic and narcissistic person will not go to therapy.
Mhm.
And when they do go to therapy, what they're hoping in most cases is that they are going to be able to charm, seduce, and manipulate the therapist into their
Mhm.
point of view, which
Mhm.
is why you need to go to someone like me who is focused on
Yeah.
narcissistic wounding
Yes.
and things like that. So very,
Yes.
very important. So this is just a wonderful conversation, and we've got a couple of more comments here. So Alicia added that longing feeling of being left was excruciatingly painful. I held on to hope for his wake-up call too. I just didn't think I would survive if I let myself hear the whisper of no.
Mhm.
Beautifully said, Alicia. I hope
Yes.
you're reading that, Joan, because you're not alone. You can see Alicia understands
Yes.
completely what you're feeling. And then Joan said this type of abuse is so effective. It
Mhm.
is, and I'm glad you see it that way, Joan, that it is effective,
Mhm.
because then you can see it as a sort of mechanical thing. It
Mhm.
had an effect, and
Mhm.
then you can have perspective on it. You're not in it at that moment when you see it as effective. You're saying, "Oh, that's the tool that they use to manipulate me."
Yes.
That can be very helpful. And Serena says, "Whoop, where did you go, Serena?" Um, oh, here we are. Joan says, "We ladies are right." Okay, good. And Kim says, "He doesn't want to accept responsibility." No, of course he doesn't want to. And Joan said, "At therapy, they hope the counselor will tell you to change." That's exactly why they go. The narcissist, the hijackal, as I call them, goes only to counseling to seduce, charm, and manipulate the therapist into their side and their view so they can both come together and re-wound you.
Right. And right. And be told that they are right and you are wrong.
Exactly. So you're absolutely right there, Joan. So you've been there, you've done
Yeah.
that.
She's
Now
got
you
all
know
the
you're
pieces.
yes, you need now it's time to walk through the grief.
Mhm.
Serena says that when we meet a partner and they wind up treating us the same way, and we've already become so numb to it because we grew up with it, that I think
Mhm.
is the reason that we
Yes.
tolerate being treated. And it
Yes.
is. You have
Yes.
just become inured to it, numb to it. You think that's the
Mhm.
way the world is, that's the way you deserve to be treated.
Mhm.
That's a reflection of who you are, and that's not true.
It
It's not
feels
true
so
at all.
familiar.
Yeah, it is. You're comfortably uncomfortable, and the abuse
Yes.
feels familiar. And Serena went on to say, treated that way by partners, but we also want to see the good. I think it's more than normal. I think that's what she was saying. Um, we want to get to the place, regardless of what we might think of as normal. I like to replace that word with healthy.
Healthy. Yes. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. So Joan says, "It's just my heart and mind that are disconnected." Well, it's not just Joan. Your heart and mind are very important, and I hope that you will get some outside support for that, because you deserve to do that. So this is the last one we're going to read today, and this is from Serena. That's always recently just diagnosed with a spondylitis. I'm having pains all over my body that I never even knew I can have. Yeah. So,
Mhm.
we talked about that and autoimmune disease from the
Mhm.
ongoing stress and anxiety.
Mhm.
Well, Sherry, this has been a fabulous conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and joining in. And I've said before that you can find Dr. Sherry Cormier at her website. Here it is for you, sherrycormier.com. So notice how to spell Cormier. You have to remember it's Cormier. Check it.
CormierPhD.com. Cormier. I know. I've heard everyone pronounces it all different ways. I'm used to answering to many different ways.
Right, good. Well, thank you so much, and be sure
It's
that
been wonderful. And I really commend the people, so many people who made such great comments today.
yeah, it really was a wonderful conversation.
Mhm.
Dr. Sherry's book is Sweet Sorrow: Finding Enduring Wellness After Loss and Grief. It's available for you at Amazon. And if you'd like to talk to me, you can go to forrelationshiphelp.com. I have a bunch of free checklists there so you can check about your toxic relationship or the health of your relationship, or whether someone's passive aggressive, lots of things there for you. And if you want to be part of the community, the Emerging Empowered community, I invite you come on over to joinintoday.com. So until we speak again together at another Facebook Live or Monday evenings at 7 p.m. Pacific when I do my podcast live, I hope that you will treat yourself very, very well because you're precious and you matter.
Yes.
Talk soon.